Welcome to Part 3 of the training podcast for panel moderators for the National Association of Women MBAs. In Part 1, you learned about your role as a moderator and what to do way before conference begins to be sure that your panel is a success. In Part 2, you learned about how to conduct the panel, what to do the day of the panel to get there, how to start out right, and how to conduct the questions. Part 3 is about getting the panel back on track and turning the panel over to the audience members to take questions from them. Sometimes a panelist may have gone off track, and you really need to bring the subject back around. You might be able to do that by just announcing the next topic, but if you have been listening carefully, you should be able to take a few key ideas from what was said in the last one or two speakers and bring the panel back to the topic of the last question. So you want to refocus the group. You might want to repeat the question at hand to the next panelist. Or you might need to interject at a pause, especially if someone's gone into a whole different area. You might want to say, "That's such a great idea. It would be an interesting topic for a full panel discussion, but let's focus back on work-life balance issues today." After all the panelists have finished answering the questions that you set out, it's time to turn the panel over to the audience. The next section is about how to facilitate questions from the audience. The first thing that you need to do is let the audience know how you're going to handle questions. Do you want them to raise their hands? Do you want them to just speak up? This might depend on how many people you have in attendance. What you want to do is make eye contact with the questioner so that that person knows you're ready to take his or her question. Next, repeat the question. If the question was very long, you may need to paraphrase it. Sometimes people ask 3 or 4 questions, so you as the moderator need to decide if you're going to repeat all of those or if you're going to start with one part of the question. Then direct it to a panelist. You might look at your panelists and say, "Is there anyone who'd like to take this first?" So direct the question to a panelist. After the answer, decide whether to let another panelist add an opinion or move on. And this depends on the timing. If there's another panelist that's given you a signal that indicates that she'd like to say more, then you might offer that panelist time to do that. On the other hand, if you're running short on time, you might want to go to another questioner. If you decide not to take a follow-up question from the audience member, be sure to turn your body and your eye contact to another part of the room. That's an important technique for discouraging follow-up questions. If, however, you have a very small audience and you're welcoming a follow-up question, keep your body in parallel with the audience member who asked the question and maintain your eye contact. That would invite a follow-up question from that person. If the answers have been long and involved, you might want to summarize them before taking another question. What happens if no one's asked any questions? Well, I hope that you've come prepared with some questions of your own. As the time allocated for your panel comes to a close, you need to give the signal to end the question and answer session. Keep your eye on the clock, and you might want to say, "We have time for 1 or 2 more questions." At that point, after the last question, you want to summarize the key takeaways from the panel. Remember that during this whole podcast, we've been talking about a panel that was about work-life balance. So you might at that point say, "We've had a great panel today, and we've heard from 4 fabulous people about how they manage their work-life balance. We've learned a little bit about the tools and techniques that they use, and we've learned a little bit about how they've prepared their office environment to be supportive of their role away from work." Next, you want to thank all the panelists for their time. As I mentioned earlier, NAWMBA will be providing you with a session facilitator. So at that point, you need to ask the session facilitator to hand out the evaluation sheets. You want to thank the attendees for coming and direct them to where the next sessions are. Finally, be sure that people leave the room when it's time. There will be another panel slated for the room that you're in. If you find that there's a panelist talking with an attendee and it's really time to clear the room, you can go over and stand next to the panelist for a minute, wait for a moment, and then politely interrupt and let them know that another panel is slated to begin in that room in the next few minutes. Congratulations, you have run a fabulous panel. After the event, make some notes on what went well and what needed improvement, and be sure to write a thank you note to each panelist. They've come to the NAWMBA conference on their own time to share their expertise with you and with the attendees, so it's important that you show them your appreciation. So in the last 3 podcasts, we talked about your role as a moderator, how to get ready for the panel, how to run it the day of the panel to make sure that you're surfacing key ideas and summarizing them for the audience, how to get a panel back on track, and how to be sure that the audience members have a chance to ask questions. We've also talked about how to close the panel effectively. I hope that these 3 podcasts have made you feel more comfortable as a panel moderator. The next slide has a couple of sources that you might want to look at to read more. But finally, I want to thank you for your time volunteering as a panel moderator. To complete the training podcast, you need to pass an online quiz at surveymonkey.com. The link to the survey is shown below, and it may also be found on the NAWMBA website. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to seeing you at the NAWMBA conference.